Hand lettering can be a lot of fun and it can be a great addition to the work that you're already doing. The problem is, when you're first starting, it can be a little tricky. It's one of those things that you see and you're like, oh, that looks cool, I could do that. And then you start trying it and you're like, wait a second, this is a little bit harder than I imagined. I think one of the biggest hurdles is just trying to figure out where to even start when you're trying to stylize letter forms and begin. The problem is, you think you're familiar with how letter forms look because you've been looking at them your whole life, but if you haven't been drawing them, you're not looking at them the same way that you're used to looking at things that you draw. I don't know if that makes any sense. Regardless, in this video, I'm gonna show you some ways to get started with hand lettering without having to start from scratch and make up the styles. Sounds pretty good, right? All right, let's get into it. The first thing that you can do is pretty versatile and it's a fun, simple way to get started. All you do is type a word out, whatever you want to letter, and just the most simple typeface you can find. You could just use the default typeface. I recommend sticking with uppercase at the beginning. It'll just be a little bit easier. Letters are a little bit more simple, a little bit bigger. Listen, you can do lowercase if you want now. I just think uppercase is easier to start with. Anyway, this technique is called building a wall. Nope. We're not gonna call it that. What you're gonna do here is you're just gonna use this simple letter form and then draw around it in a stylized manner. This way, you have the existing structure of the letter form, but you're adding your own unique twist. And you can do a ton of different ways to do this. One of my favorite ways to do this is just like a shaky line, and then you get a bold punk rock looking letter form. Pretty simple. Another one I really love to do is drippy letters. For this, I just sort of make an undulating line around the outside of the letters, and then just put some little drippy drips as I'm going around. One of the benefits to working like this is you don't have to be focusing on the word and the letters the whole time. You can just have your guideline to follow and then just add style as you're going without having to worry about whether or not the style that you're adding is making the letter illegible because you're using that underlying skeleton and adding the letter meat to the bones. Another fun one is to just do the wiggly lines without the drips, and then you get a cool sort of like water, wavy, flowy, trippy letter style that can be a lot of fun. A way to take this technique a step further is to modify the type before you trace it. What you do is just type it all out. If you're using something like Procreate or Fresco as I'm using here, once you type the word out, you would just tap on the layer, convert it to a pixel layer, and this will allow you to manipulate it and transform it like it's a regular image. So you could go down to transform and then go to like skew or distort and play around with the angle, give it some dynamic angles. So maybe it looks like it's flying off the page. And then you can add a little bit more character by individually selecting the different letters and shifting them around and moving them a bit so it looks a little more energetic. For this one, I'm just tracing around the outside, similar in proportion all the way around and not really changing the shape. I'm just making these letters bolder and bigger and then letting them overlap a little bit. Then once I have them all traced in, I'll duplicate it and shift it down and then use that as a guide to make some easy 3D letters in this new stylized, whamified letters. This technique is pretty simple and straightforward, but makes such a big difference compared to this original wham treatment with just the regular typeface. And it looks like a completely custom type treatment, even though we used something as a starting point. There's endless possibilities for this. All right, let's take it a step further. Let's do something a little more complicated, but not too complicated, just a little bit more. Maybe you find a typeface that you think looks pretty cool and you type it out and you're like, that's sort of what I want to do, but it just, I want to make a more custom version of that. Well, you can do that. You can use this as a starting point. Let's turn this into something custom and unique and fun. So what I'll do is I will convert this to a pixel layer and then we have full control over it like it is a drawing. And I'll just start moving stuff around and trying to get it to be closer to what I want. So let's say I want the O separate. I think to make things easy, what I'll do is just cut this and put it on its own layer. Then it's easier to kind of move around. Maybe we sort of tuck it in up there. And then I'm already starting to see things. Like maybe we can connect that H to the L. You ever think about that? Maybe I want this to look a little bit more like script so I can start kind of pushing these letters together to see if I can get them to connect as is. So I'll grab the magic wand thing and shift it over. I'm gonna double tap the modifier button to lock that horizontal axis. So I can get it pretty close, but you can see that line doesn't line up, but that's part of customizing it. I can change the angle a little bit so that it is cursive, or becomes cursive. I'm also thinking, because this says, oh really, it's sort of a question. So maybe a question mark would be handy. So I think what I'll do is I'll just type one out and use that. We don't need to make it from scratch. So at this point, what I will do is take this as like a starting point, and I'm just gonna merge it all down, and I'm going to bring down the opacity and start sketching on top of this and see where that takes me. So my idea was at the bottom of this R, maybe could kind of swoosh in like that and connect. It's kind of cool. It's a little aggressive, but that's a starting point. So maybe it's not, doesn't need to come down that far. Maybe it's just like this, can sort of match that width, and you know, we're getting somewhere. Let's fill this in and look at it and see. Okay, so I think that is pretty good, but I just want to, so I'm gonna make a new layer and start working on this connection here between the H and the L. So I think even just that simple connection, just kind of, it's a nice, elegant solution. I think what I'll do now is just trace this over and make it feel cohesive, and then we'll see where that takes us. All right, so I got this to a pretty good spot. The only thing I'm thinking is that R, I feel like it could use a little more flair to offset the other stuff that's going on. My idea is to take the tail of the Y and see if we can like rotate it into like a fancy tail onto the top of the R. I'm gonna come in here with the lasso tool and then copy and paste this, and then just drag it over here, flip it, reverse it. I think this is actually gonna be perfect. I'll just sort of make a little bit of a connection there. And I feel like that really balances it out. It's got that sort of visual relationship with the end, and it just sort of flows together in a nice way now. I think what I wanna do now is just sort of put it into like a shape, maybe give it like a little bit of a 3D thing to just make it feel like a finished, fun little lockup. I'm gonna loosely draw a border around it that like follows it, but like simplifies and cleans things up a little bit. Like for example here, just slightly curve up. Can do the same thing over here. Okay, I think that looks pretty good. And now I'm thinking if we just sort of make it like a little bit of a 3D type shape, it'll pull it all together. I'm going to duplicate this and then drag one down, and then we can come to the top one and just grab the magic wand and select inside. Did not work because we didn't close the edges, but that's fine. We can just do it the old-fashioned way. I'm just gonna bring down the opacity a little bit so it's easier to see. And then I'm just gonna erase the area inside the frame. So bring the opacity back up, and now I'm just gonna make some connection points between the two areas. While we're here, we can close up those little gaps. Let's merge them down into one layer. All right, now we got a sketch for like a pretty unique type treatment based on something that already existed. I'm gonna tighten this up, maybe add some color, and I'll show you how it turned out. Here's where I ended up. I think it's pretty fun. I just, you know, played around with some colors, used my Rezo brushes from Retro Spyco pack, and just kind of layered them a little bit to get that retro vibe. This is fun. I like it. You should try modifying some existing type. It's a good time. All right, let's do another one. Another fun thing you can do is to find some vintage lettering as a reference point and try to use that to create something new. I found this lettering treatment on an old board game in a consignment shop, and I just took a picture of it, and I'm gonna use this to make something new. This one says Dark Shadows. Let's do Silly Goose, because it's like it's the opposite. It's like serious and dark and silly. Goose. I don't know why. That's just the first thing that popped in my head. Let's do it. So I'm gonna bring down the opacity and trace over some of these letters. Looks like the only actual letter we'll be able to use here is the S and the O, but that's okay. I'm just gonna grab pencil here and trace over this S. I don't want it to be exactly the same, so I'm just sort of loosely copying it. Generally, if I'm recreating something from like vintage lettering, I'll like sketch it like this, and then when I do the final line work, I'll just work from my sketch, and that way it's like a little bit different. So I'll take this S and I'll just sort of like move it down here. So we don't have an I. What we can do is just like look at other letters and use them as a reference point. So like this part of the H, we could just like kind of trace that part like that. So it's like based on something from the letters, but it's a new one. And then we could put that there. And we'll have to do the same thing for the L. Maybe we'll start with the other side of this H. I think I'm just gonna quickly kind of trace over this right here and like make an L from it. And like, let's see what it looks like if we kind of stack them like that. It seems like it could work pretty well. As you can see, we're starting to lose some of what happens here. And it's because these letters sort of fit together in a more intentional way. But what we can do is kind of come back in and re-stylize them once we know. But at this point, we don't have to worry too much. We're just sort of getting the main elements, and then we can adjust as needed. So for the Y, maybe start with like the top of this D, and then maybe grab the bottom of this S like that, and then we can kind of bring that over here. So if we connect this, pull this up, and we just kind of need to shorten this top part. And I think that is looking pretty good. So I'm gonna pull this over and just sort of like look at this reference and see what we can do, have it fit together a little bit better. And now that's sort of looking like it fits into this world. All right, that's pretty silly. We need a goose. Taking this part of the D, and let's see what happens if we just flip it. So I'm gonna come up here, transform it, and then I'm gonna drag it over to the O, and then we can kind of use that for the top of it. And then we can just sort of pull that in a little bit. Kind of cool now. I'm just paying attention to things like how thick the bottom is versus the top, and then the sides, because that's sort of what gives these letters their style. So now that we got two of those, so I duplicated it, pull those down here, and now I can see that that G needs to rotate a little bit more. And we just need an E. Don't have an E, but we can start with this D, pull this down, use the thickness at the top of the D as like a reference. Same with the bottom. The A has got this like little bit of an angle in the middle part, so maybe we just sort of do the same thing. And that E looks like a letter that would fit within this mix. And then take each of the words and sort of place them where the other ones are and see how they're sort of looking together, and see if there's anything else we could do to sort of make it fit better and like look more like the original. I'm noticing that the ones that I did are a little too static in terms of like the baseline. Like you can see they're sort of going up and down. Mine are not doing that. So we can fill this in, and then I'm gonna use the solid shapes to like adjust the baselines a little bit, and then use that to like do a tighter version. All right, so I'm gonna bring this silly goose over here. I'm gonna take this S, and I'm just gonna rotate it and just sort of line it up with that D. And I'm just gonna kind of tweak these other letters. And if we look at that, that silly feels a lot more in line with the style. So in the reference here, the shadows word is quite a bit longer, so it's not as representational of what we're doing, but I think it's okay. I'm just sort of like shifting them around to follow the other letters, but also the way they fit together. I'm curious what it would look like if we did like a lowercase style G, but like still uppercase, you know what I mean? Like the other way. So I want to experiment with that real quick. That's a little bit more interesting and looks a little bit less repetitive with on the other one, like the G and the two O's are all very similar. So you know what, let's do that. So now I'll take this, scale it up, and then do a tighter version based on this sketch, but like refining it a little bit more as I go. So just for fun, I threw some color down loosely based on the reference just to show it in that example, but I think this looks like a pretty good silly goose treatment of dark shadows. So find some old stuff and make something new from it. So those are fun, right? I've actually done a few different videos like this, and I keep getting requests about beginner lettering videos, so there's another one. If you haven't seen the others, I'll link them both here. You could check them out. Maybe if you did see them, go back and watch them again. Maybe you missed something. Maybe it'll give you some new ideas for some new ways to incorporate some fun hand lettering into your work. I think this has been a good talk. You can let me know below if you think it's been a good talk, and maybe we'll have another good talk very soon. Okay. Good day. Good day? We're not saying good day.